All right, I'm making this video today to go over something I hear a good bit in knife conversations. People mention good steels and bad steels. I just want to kind of cross that whole idea out because the context we use those words in doesn't really hold true. There is no good steel or bad steel, generally speaking, when it comes to a pocket knife. Steel that holds an edge and is hardenable is a good knife steel. So that's all you want to do, is be able to hold an edge, which means it has to be able to get hard. When we use the term good and bad, we don't use it in that context. We use it in the sense of more or less, I like this steel and I don't like that steel. Just because one person likes a steel and one person doesn't like the same steel doesn't make that a bad steel. Really, we need to be picking steels based on what our needs are and what our skill level is. And I'm going to get into a little bit of that, but this is not going to be any kind of a doctoral thesis presentation or anything like that. If you want something more on that level, and I know steel can be overwhelming, and that's why I think a lot of people don't really dig into it, but Jay Ankerson, A-N-K-E-R-S-O-N. Google his name, lots of information. I believe he has an YouTube channel. I believe he even has his own forum. I mean, he's a wealth of knowledge. Anything and everything you could ever want to know about steel, if he doesn't already have some information out there about it, I'm sure if you ask him, he can go ad nauseum about it. I mean, he's just a wealth of knowledge. I can't say enough about him being a resource. So with that being said, this is going to be more of a general conversation about good steel and bad steel. So the first thing we need to look at is, what characteristics are we looking for in a steel? What are the main characteristics of a steel? So there are pretty much three main categories of a steel, which would be corrosion resistance. Is it going to rust? If so, how fast is it going to rust? Edge retention and wear resistance. And again, I know that people would consider those in two different categories, but this is a general overview about steel. And basically what edge retention and wear resistance means is it going to take an edge? How hard is it going to be to put an edge on the knife? And how long is it going to keep that knife when I'm cutting something abrasive? Which more extreme examples of that in everyday use would be cardboard or rope or something of that nature. And then finally, toughness. And some people would say, you know, why are we talking about toughness? These are all folding knives. You shouldn't need a tough knife in a folding knife. Folding knife is a broken knife. I hear you, I get that, but the flip side of that is we could talk about that in a few different ways. If we're talking fixed blades, we could be talking about like a chopper that you're going to be slamming into wood. How well is it going to take that impact? That's what the toughness measures. Or if you are somebody that works at like a retail store or a factory, or you just break down a lot of boxes for some reason, if you cut into a staple, how well does that steel stand up to that impact? What's the impact of that steel? That's what the toughness is. So those are the three main categories you need to be considering when you're looking at a steel for you, because again, the steel is not good or bad as long as it's hardenable and can take an edge. The steel is good or bad based on if it fits your needs. A good example of that is I have a buddy that I work with. He goes down to the Florida Keys for a week every year, and they scuba dive and do all those types of things like that. Now, if I'm going down to the Florida Keys, I wouldn't carry a folding knife, but just for sake of example, if I brought this knife right here, which is in PD1, this is a tool steel knife. This has a lot of carbon in it, and I'm not going to get too much into all of that stuff because, like I said, I'm not going to make that kind of a video today. But the more carbon, the more prone it is to rust. PD1 is going to rust up on you, especially if you submerge it in salt water. Now the rust, you know, it's not going to rust right before your eyes, but it's going to be much more prone to rust than something that's on the other end of the spectrum, like H1 or LCN 200, something like that. Now, the two main categories of steel are going to be stainless steel and then more of your tool steel, your carbon steel side of things. So those are the two sides of things. And then within those, there are different tiers. Things have more elements added to the steel to provide different properties. And again, I'm not going to get into that too much here. If you want to check something out like that, I highly suggest you look into Jay Ankerson. But we'll start out with something like this. Something like this Browning knife here is made out of 8CR13 MOV. So this is going to be a steel that has decent rust resistance, decent average toughness, and it's going to hold an edge okay. It's not going to hold an edge like S30 or something like that. But you know, if you're just a average everyday guy, this knife is going to start cutting at the beginning of the day. It's going to still cut at the end of the day, and it's because it's not as wear resistant or tough, it's going to sharpen up for you pretty easily. Same thing here with this CRKT. The CRKT is made out of 8CR15 MOV, so it's pretty much in that same family of stainless steels. You know, it's going to be good to use all day or to use every day as an EDC knife. It's going to hold an edge for a reasonable amount of time. It's going to be easy enough to touch up when you need to touch that knife up. Now, maybe a step up from that was going to be this knife here, which is in 154 cm, and this steel is going to be pretty much in the same category. It's going to have pretty good toughness. It's going to be easy to sharpen, but it's not going to hold an edge for a super long time. Now, like I said, with all of that being said, it would be great to have a steel like this up here, which is CTS XHP. So this is going to be more on the super steel side of things, and this is a stainless steel. But most people don't have the equipment and or skill to sharpen something that's going to stay sharp forever. So when you're talking about these steels, you're talking about something that you can put on a sharp maker, a ceramic stone. If you keep it up, you can strop it fairly regularly and keep it sharp for a long time. But if you move up to something like this and you're the average person that lets your knife get dull, like a butter knife, you're going to need some kind of diamond stone or something like that to sharpen this steel up, and some skill. Now, a lot of people don't have the equipment. Some people don't have the skill. Some people don't have either, and they don't care to, which is a whole different story. But that's pretty much the lower end of the steels. And then you can move up in stainless with the S30 right here in the Benchmade bug out, which again, S30 is just kind of a jack of all trades steel. It's got decent toughness, decent wear resistance, decent corrosion resistance. It just does everything pretty well. So it's become pretty much a standard in the mid to mid high end knife world. Then the S35 VN was brought out kind of not as a replacement, but as an upgrade to the S30. And this was more so for manufacturers. S35 is easier to manufacture because it's easier on belts and things of that nature. So this helps the manufacturers. Now, some people will tell you, I prefer S35 VN. It can be run a little bit harder. It's less chippy, so on and so forth. Not saying that's not true, but the main reason why this was brought out was from the manufacturing process standpoint. And even a step up from there on the stainless end of things is going to be these two steels here. This steel being CPM 20CV. Again, this is going to be one of those steels that is not necessarily going to be as tough. As you gain in some areas, you're going to lose in others. So if we have a knife that's going to be very stain resistant and it's going to stay sharp for a very long time, generally speaking, it's not going to have the same level of toughness as something that's more of a tool steel. So again, this is going to be a steel that will stay sharp for a very long time, is not going to rust on you too easily, but its impact resistance is not going to be outstanding and overboard. Same thing with this here. And a lot of people like CTS XHP. I'm more of a tool steel guy, but I really like CTS XHP. This steel holds an edge for a very long time. It's not too prone to corrosion. It strops up fairly easily on a strop if you know what you're doing and you keep up with it. Good steel overall, but again, this does not necessarily have the same toughness as a tool steel, and if you let it get dull, it's going to be a beast to sharpen. On the other side of things, we have something that's more simple, like A2 tool steel and or high carbon steel. And the reason why it's called that is because it has more carbon. That's when you hear people say tool steel. Tool steels are higher in carbon, which means they're higher in corrosion possibilities. So there's more of a chance that this is going to corrode, which this has been in its sheath for probably a month without being used, and I didn't oil it. And you can see there's a little bit of surfaced rust right there. Nothing major, easy to knock off, but that's what the deterrent is for a lot of people with a non-stainless or carbon steel or tool steel. So that's more on the basic end of things. This steel is going to hold an edge for a decent amount of time. It's going to have a higher level of toughness, and it's going to be a little bit easier to touch up and sharpen up. PSF 27, which this knife is in, is like a spray form version of D2, so it's like an improved version of D2. So arguably it's a step up from something more basic like an A2 or a D2. Again, it's going to give you the same properties as the A2 steel, pretty similar. Like I said, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. There are differences, obviously. And then you have this up here, which is PD1, which again, this is a higher carbon steel. It has more additives to the steel, which makes it more complex than something like A2, but it's in the same general family, being a high carbon tool steel knife. So with all those things being said and kind of walking through all the different properties of the steels, again, on a very surface level, there is no good steel and there's no bad steel as long as the steel hardens and it takes an edge. That's pretty much the only requirement for knife steel. It's what's gonna benefit you and your skill set. Do you need something that's easier to sharpen like this 8 CR13 MOV? Or do you need something that's more impact resistant and maybe a little bit harder to sharpen like this PD1? Or do you want to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and use something more like this super steel here, stainless super steel and CPM 20 CV, but you have diamond stones, the skill to sharpen it, and you know that you're not going to let this get too dull before you try to touch it up. So in a nutshell, that is pretty much what I wanted to discuss. I'd love to hear what you guys think is your preferred, or not what you think, what you all's preferred steel is down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on steel in general. Post them below, or please make a reply video. I'd love to hear that. Love discussing this stuff with you guys. Again, this isn't a Jay Ankerson level of knife steel discussion, but just a little something for people to think about and kind of break out of that good steel, bad steel kind of discussion that I hear a lot. Appreciate you guys watching. Hope to catch you guys in the next video. And remember, a lazy man carries a dull knife.